What's happening, people? I'm back with another reaction, back with some more Bad Religion, and we're back with another request. Shout out to Ryan. I did a reaction to a Generator tune, or a tune from their Generator 1992 album, and he mentioned, while you're doing this album, you should check out Too Much to Ask. So yeah, I thought that would be a good idea. It's a tune that I very much enjoy, but I haven't thought about in a while. So yeah, it's what I remember about the tune sonically is it has sort of a kind of a not a slow intro, but sort of like almost like a folk punk kind of intro, and then it kind of kicks into what we might consider like more traditional Bad Religion sound. And lyrically, I enjoy it in that it paints a number of pictures, and it looks at them from different angles, like as the verses progress. Which is to say, I think the song is getting at sort of the tension between being positive or optimistic and being cynical and pessimistic, and what happens when you start to again look at the same situation from a number of different angles. So he starts by talking about a sort of like, I don't know, like a utopian kind of American dream sort of image, this idea that like, like I see this community, this middle of the road community where, the neighbors are always there to help if you need, and, it's people have what they, this like safe drinking water, and a sort of, they all have their own plot of land and their own little like place to call home, and it's this very sort of like, almost like, again, utopian or idealistic or idyllic even sort of flavor to it. And then it goes on to talk about, then there's also the like, you gotta, hit your remote to watch the TV, and everyone needs 3 cars because, you gotta keep up with the Joneses. You gotta, be the best, like, best and most successful suburbanite that you can, and so on. So it begins to kind of paint like the corruption of it, the danger of this sort of like utopian mindset, or this idealized understanding of the American dream. And indeed, it then talks about like, and in fact, I think that's ahead, right? There's a verse in between that where I think it's something to the effect of like, while this suburban idealized living is playing out, what if we could all kind of like, find new ways to like organize society, and what if law enforcement didn't have to use violence as their primary like means of achieving order, and so on? What if we could all have an environmental like awakening and realize the dangers of certain types of fuels and so on, and ultimately like what if we could all kind of come to realize that we need to change the way we do things? And it's like, so it's all unpacking like, what if we could find this? But he's like, hey, you know what, I'm not an optimist, I try to be a realist, and I think we're actually living too far out of bounds for that to actually obtain. And indeed, it then gets to that verse where it's saying like, ultimately some of the things that we want, these perfect suburban homes with, we each have 3 TVs and all the rooms and our nice cars and so on that burn fossil fuels. Well, guess what? Like in the long run, that's going to cause problems, and that will undercut our notion of this like idealistic, optimistic future. So he's basically saying, is it too much to ask to try to like realize some of these things and maybe rein in the types of behavior, even if that means having to like compromise or cut into this perfect cookie cutter image of like Americana, utopian society. So the American dream, if you will. Again, so I think it's looking at not only like social aspects specifically within the United States, but the way in which humans like conceive of this perfect existence, even if that means like, we're going to change things and we're going to do them better and so on. And it's like, yeah, but we're not living in a way that would sustain that. We're living too far out of bounds for that to happen. So yeah, that's what I remember about the lyrics. It'll be interesting to see if there's, maybe an entire verse that I'm forgetting, or at the very least if there's like a line or two that I'm not, putting into the puzzle with the rest of the pieces. So we'll have to see. Once again, shout out to Ryan for requesting this, but let's get to it. This is Bad Religion, Too Much to Ask, from their 1992 album Generator. Yeah, like, folk punk kind of. That's what I hear. I'm thinking too far out of bounds. Yeah, the raw materials and the cheap prices to get some of these consumer like items in this world require the plundering of other places on the planet. And the deliberate undervaluation of labor and services performed there. The earth is sinking. We'll forgive the double negative. Yeah, it's a really cool tune. Again, there were a couple lines there that I wasn't thinking about in advance. Like, you know, he's not just saying like we're living outside of bounds, but there were other formulations of it, including like, am I thinking too far outside of bounds or out of bounds? But yeah, really cool tune. I love the pace of it. It sounds a little different than you might hear on Suffer, but I think it is a very nice progression into a song like that from the 3 albums that I always talk about, Suffer, No Control, Against the Grain. And again, I think Generator and Recipe for Hate pretty much fit into that run as well. I just whereas the first 3 I consider them A+, Generator and Recipe for Hate I'd give like flat A's or like A-, so still very, very good, just maybe not quite as good, given the standard that they had basically set and continued to hit for a few albums in a row. But yeah, a really cool tune, and like I said, I like the speed and the pace of it, as well as that interesting opening. I don't know why, but it always struck me as knowing that Greg has a bit of an interest in folk music and sort of Midwestern kind of rock and so on. It doesn't. I always felt like there was sort of a connection there, that opening kind of maybe that's something that Greg would like to explore. And again, at some point, I mentioned this to Ryan, I would like to react to some of Graffin's solo material. I used to have I think a ripped copy of his first solo album. I can't locate it and it's not on my computer, so yeah, I don't know what happened there. I never had his second one, but I would like to get that too, so yeah, at some point I'd like to go through that material. And my understanding is that not only sonically is it different, but I think lyrically it has a different flavor from Bad Religion, so be interested to hear. But yeah, let me know what you think of this one. Other than that, thank you for listening and watching. I'll see you next time.